Hi, my name is Eric, welcome back to my channel. Let's talk once again about Mariah Carey. Today, as you requested, I'm going to react to her 1995 album Daydream and break down the album's lyrics. So far, I have reacted to Butterfly and Caution, both of which came later in Mariah's career, so it'll be interesting to hear how her music and especially how her voice sounded back in the mid-90s. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments down below what Mariah Carey album I should react to next. Check the description box for a link to a list of nonprofits you can donate to. Please subscribe to be here when I post new videos every week, and hit the bell icon to be notified when my videos go live. Without further ado, track number 1 is Fantasy. That was so much fun. Such a bright, summery feeling, and of course Mariah's vocals just effortless, so athletic, so dynamic. I've only ever heard bits and pieces of this song, but I definitely will be returning to it soon. And what I like too is that lyrically we already are expanding on the idea of the title of the album, because between fantasies and daydreams, we have the problem being that she's into a guy that she can't have or that she doesn't have, and so she fills that void with fantasy. And like I've said before, yearning is one of the most powerful emotions in pop music, which is why this song is just extra successful. The second verse in particular has some really interesting lyrics. Images of rapture creep into me slowly as you're going to my head. I think this is just such an interesting way of describing the process of developing a crush on someone, especially because of the contrast between rapture, which as an idea is just so monumental, and her language of creeping slowly, which is defined by its smallness. But what else is interesting is the phrasing, "you're going to my head," because on a literal level what she's describing here, of course, is that she's thinking about him all the time, but the idea of something going to someone's head usually describes someone having an inflated ego or becoming overly confident. So I think this deepens the idea of her fantasy by implying that her infatuation is misleading her. It's not just a fantasy, but an illusion. Track number 2 is Underneath the Stars.
One summer night, we ran away for a while. We drifted to another state of mind, and imagined I was yours and you were mine. Underneath the stars, we give a wrapped in the warm, gentle breeze, us with the heat of desire, all the natural high as we drifted to another place and time.
Beautiful. It's sort of a simple, nostalgic ballad, but the real star here, of course, is Mariah's voice. So precise that I think there were even moments where the vocal track was doubled and she sounded really still like one voice, which is just amazing that on separate takes she sounded so identical. That is how precise she is. And there were moments where her riffs and runs and ad-libs were weaving around the background vocals, and it's just such a pleasure to listen to. And once again, Mariah is expanding on this idea of an illusion in love, but instead this time it is shared instead of one-sided. She's describing a time when she was young and ran off to hook up with this guy in secrecy, and she says on the chorus, "We drifted to another state of mind and imagined I was yours and you were mine." And initially this is weird because they are literally physically together. Like, why does she have to imagine them being together? I think we get a few clues from the fact that they have to hide their love. They run away together under cover of darkness. But also, the dark as an image implies vagueness, an inability to see the situation clearly. And then on the bridge, Mariah says, "Beautiful and bittersweetly, you were fading into me, and I was gently fading into you, but the time went sailing by, reluctantly we said goodbye." On her other two albums that I've listened to, Mariah also talked about keeping her love a secret, and in those contexts, it typically had to do with her being a celebrity and hiding from the paparazzi and the public eye, so that could be one explanation here. But just very generally, I think this is about a relationship that works physically but not emotionally, and so with time they drift apart naturally. The stars just didn't align for them. Track number 3 is One Sweet Day featuring Boys to Men.
Sorry, I've never told you, 'cause you've flown away, so far away. Feeling, knowing you hear me, it keeps me alive. And I know you're shining down on me from heaven. Eventually we'll be together, one sweet day. I never showed you, assumed you'd always be there. Like so many friends, we've lost along the way. And I know you're shining down on me from heaven. One sweet day. I never told you all I wanted to say.
Definitely another track with a lot of great vocal work. I love the key changes and the constantly increasing level of intensity and drama. That would have been, I imagine, really amazing to see in concert. And Mariah is still committed to this same motif of fantasy, and whereas on Fantasy, Mariah was filling a void left by this yearning for someone she couldn't have, here the void that she's filling is one left by loss. And another dimension that Mariah adds here that wasn't present before is regret. On the third verse, Boys to Men say, "Darling, I never showed you, assumed you'd always be there." The rest of the song is wistful but optimistic and mostly lyrically consists of the same sort of assurances that people in mourning give themselves to cope with grief. But again, with the introduction of regret, we have another step in this steady sequence of deepening the central motif of fantasy. Because first, daydreams were an outlet for desire, which is pretty harmless. Then, daydreams or fantasies were a way of reflecting on loss. And now, Mariah is learning that fantasy cannot fully replace lived experience. And it's a valuable lesson, of course, but I'm interested to hear if Mariah's voice on the album starts to run into more emotional turmoil because of it. Track number 4 is Open Arms, which is a Journey cover, but as usual, I will interpret it as Mariah's own words and as part of this broader story.
Lying beside you, here in the dark. How could our love be so blind? We drifted apart, and here you are by my side. Now I come to you.
Okay, now that I've heard it, I definitely recognize the original song. Steve Perry also is a powerful vocalist, and Mariah's interpretation here is predictably beautiful. But what's just as impressive to me is how neatly this fits into the story of the album, because, especially on the first verse, it's basically the exact same story as on Underneath the Stars, with Mariah saying, "How could our love be so blind? We sailed on together, we drifted apart, and here you are by my side." And of course, she brings back the image of them lying together in the dark, so both the idea of love as an illusion and of sailing as an image of lovers drifting apart, both are circling back to Underneath the Stars. I'm actually really curious now if Mariah knew that she wanted to include the song in the album before writing Underneath the Stars and wrote those lyrics based on this song, or vice versa, and just found this song and thought, wow, this actually sounds a whole lot like this other song that I've written. Because in either case, it fits really, really well. But in this broader story, what has changed here is that on one sweet day, Mariah learned that she needed to live in the moment, and that's exactly what she's doing here by declaring her love for this person. Track number 5 is Always Be My Baby.
To stay, but inevitably you'll be back again. Boy, don't you know you can't escape? Ooh, darling, 'cause you'll always be my baby. I know that you'll be that boy. It's only a matter of time. You'll always be part of me. No way you never know the shame. No way you never know the shame. You
Now that is an end credit song if I ever heard one, and I love how Mariah always manages to sneak in these very writerly multisyllabic words that you wouldn't typically find in a pop song, like inevitably and indefinitely. That's very Mariah. And the story of the song also reminds me of Butterfly, because the general message is sort of, if you love somebody, set them free. The difference here is Mariah has learned the meaning of regret and of giving up love, and she knows from experience that her partner is headed down that same road. And there's honestly this sort of funny sense of dramatic irony to the title of the song, because at first glance it just sort of sounds like she's saying, I'll always have feelings for you and I'll always love you, but when she says things like, you'll be back, it's really her saying, you don't know it yet, but you're still mine. And on the chorus, she says, time can't erase a feeling this strong, which feels to me like it brings to mind the idea of lovers drifting apart on Underneath the Stars and later on Open Arms. And so I think in sort of a wholesome way, the message that's emerging is that the strongest force isn't fantasy or physical connection or even time, but love. Track number 6 is I Am Free.
once I was a prisoner, wandering through the misery. I am free. You gave me a breath of life, lighting a ray of hope for me. Free to
Yep, So that song was definitely more soul and gospel influenced. She engaged more of her husky lower register, but that made the contrast between her lower register and upper register and head voice even more dramatic and even more beautiful. And again, this song very neatly expands on the lessons of the last. On Always Be My Baby, Mariah suggested, of course, that love was the most powerful force in the world and that her partner was wrong for believing that freedom meant giving up her love. So here, when Mariah says that she is free, free in a way that with these gospel sounds is a holy type of freedom, a heavenly type of freedom, she's not saying that she is single and ready to mingle and she's free in that way, but that she has found a partner who gives her the freedom to express her love. And then she also says that this lover unclouded her eyes, which again calls back to the earlier songs where she used darkness as a motif signaling her lack of clarity about love. And once again, this partner has given her this divine knowledge that love is the most important thing. In other words, she couldn't see what was right in front of her, and that was her love. And extending that vision motif even more, track number 7 is When I Saw You.
Soft, heavenly eyes gazed into me. There were no words for me to find at all. When I saw you, when I saw you, I could not breathe. Love rushes in, changing you with a tide. Till there all at once I knew I felt so deep. Oh, when I saw you, no beginning without an end.
That one slapped. I don't know if it's just because it reminds me of the adult contemporary music of my early childhood, which is very nostalgic for me, but I mean, come on. Like, listening to anything that Mariah sings, she could be singing the phone book. I know that's such a cliche. What's like a more relevant frame of reference for Gen Z? I can't think of one. I think that means I'm old. But just as I suspected, Mariah is extending this eyes and vision motif that she had earlier with this idea of this love unclouding her vision by talking about the first time she laid her eyes on this new lover. And there are some significant details on the second verse. First, she says, "Only once in a lifetime love rushes in, changing you with the tide." This, of course, reverses the idea of her infatuation creeping in slowly from the opener, and also it calls back to the sailing idea from Underneath the Stars, but on that song, sailing was an image of lovers drifting apart, and here it's of them coming together. The tides bring them together. It's reframed her very understanding of the nature of fate and time. And then she says these absolutely beautiful lines. Dawn's ribbon of light bursts through the dark, wakening you inside. Illumination as an image signals enlightenment, often of a holy variety, and so, of course, meeting this person just has changed everything for her. And in waking her up, it subverts her need for daydreams. She is living her dream of true love. So crossing the halfway point of this album, we get all of these images from the first half, but reversed. Track number 8 is Long Ago.
Once upon a time, you whispered softly in my ear, loving words of fairy tales that I long to hear. As you slowly swept me up and carried me away, you told me pretty lies long ago. You used to want me. Still haunt me in the fool paradise that you blew away. I need
Okay, we've got another fade out here. It's interesting, this song is darker. It almost feels like another mirror image of One Sweet Day, because that song was about the soul of someone living on, and this song is about someone haunting her. Earlier on the album, Mariah set up this idea of fantasy as illusion, and she returns to that here not just in the context of idealistic distractions, but also of manipulation and lies. So the song is about a partner creating an illusion to disempower her, and a way that she conveys this is on the first verse when she says that he swept her up and carried her away. This once again brings up the image of sailing from underneath the stars, where the tides represented fate. But of course, instead of the stars or fate carrying her towards true love, it's her partner exerting this power over her. And this is why on the second verse she describes herself as sinking and drowning. Of course, if the tides are an image of love, using love very loosely here, then this love, this relationship, is hurting her. And it looks like she is going to extend this metaphor further on track number 9, Melt Away.
Come to me with a casual flow. My defenses start to go. Baby, I just melt away, fall like a rain. Baby, I can melt away your arms. And so tenderness till the feeling overflows, and I can't conceal that I'm slowly weakening. Baby, I just melt away. You cloud of memories. Baby, I just melt away, like the rain. Baby, I can melt away.
I don't know if you could hear her whistle note right there at the end, but what I really like about the lyrics of this song is not only how it continues to extend this water metaphor, but also that the way that she devotes so much real estate in this song to those water metaphors actually reflects her state of mind. Because on earlier songs, she just mentioned tides and sailing. Her powerlessness was a peripheral thought that she could manage. But now this song is basically a deluge of water images that represent her being overwhelmed. The song is drowning in water the same way that she is. That's called mimesis, form imitating content. The song otherwise is pretty straightforward. It's just Mariah using these images of melting and overflowing to describe how she is feeling overwhelmed and vulnerable. And in a vacuum, this would be romantic, but in the context of the album, we know that this is a dangerous position for Mariah to be in. She even says on the first verse that she is in a cloud of reverie, a dreamlike fog, the same kind that misled her earlier on the album. But who knows, maybe we'll be headed in a better place emotionally on track 10, Forever.
Those days of love are gone, till I burn on and on until forever, my dear. You will always be the only one. I'll hold you dear. Of our love, all through the years from now to forever. Return to your arms and unburden your heart. Call my name, tell me I'm the one you
What was that one line? I will run to your arms and unburden your heart. That's a good one. Basically, this is another breakup song like Always Be My Baby, and this time maybe she's not quite in that same level of denial. She says she'll dream of him and remember him fondly, but she doesn't cling to this idea that he will one day come back. At least not entirely. And if love is water, then its absence is fire. Mariah says on the first verse, "Our time is through, still I burn on and on." And in case you haven't seen my other videos, then I always say how fire is this convenient image because it's sort of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it embodies passion, and on the other, it embodies destruction. She is still passionately in love with this person, and it burns her, it hurts her. And on the bridge, she even says, "If you want to come back to me, I'm here." This is self-effacing. She is desperate for a love that she has thoroughly established was an illusion. But like she said on the opener, it may be a fantasy, but it's a sweet fantasy. Track number 11 is Daydream Interlude, which is a remix of Fantasy.
My daydream, overnight you creep into my dreams. Every night you creep into my dreams. It is so sweet. Come into my in silence, I keep it to myself. Come take me to one of my blue in the
That was interesting. Before it transitioned into that house beat, the beginning of the song almost sounded like that sweet fantasy had soured. I really like that this remix almost works as a sort of reprise of Fantasy, and that it brings back this very optimistic, innocent meaning of fantasy from the beginning of the album and reframes it because it's colored by Mariah's heartbreak. It's no longer yearning for someone she doesn't have yet, but for someone she's had and lost. And something about this is very cinematic in a way that to me brings to mind the idea of fate. All of these tracks were laid out as a story before I clicked play on Fantasy, and I didn't know how things would end, just like Mariah's character in these songs didn't know how things would end either. But Mariah the narrator, Mariah the retrospective voice, Mariah the artist knew where things were headed and took us along for the ride anyway. In that way, this album is wish fulfillment. Mariah can replay this love that she misses and longs for and exert power over her own story, one in which she herself felt powerless. The final track, track number 12, is Looking In.
You look at me and see the girl who lives inside the golden world. You'll never know the real me. She smiles through 1,000 tears. She waits in insecurity.
Again, the water image.
Please understand. Somebody outside looking in, and they can't bring me to my knees.
And that is how the album ends. Just like I said that on some level, the Fantasy remix was a metatextual way of Mariah breaking the fourth wall and reminding us that she is in charge of her own narrative, she uses the last track of the album to break out of the walls of the story entirely and reintroduce us to the real world. And the way that she does that is by shattering the fantasy of this romantic story that she has strung for all of these songs and reminding us that she is a real person. She's addressing the audience directly. She's saying, I am a self-conscious, self-sufficient person who deserves respect and will not be torn down. She says, I struggle and hurt, but I will control my narrative. I will assert myself and exert my power by writing my own story. Overall, even though the main attraction here is Mariah's absolutely impeccable vocals, I think the lyrics actually have a lot to offer as well. It's clear that she puts a lot of care not only into the language of the lyrics itself, which is often very poetic, but also into the messages that she's trying to send. As far as favorite tracks go, I definitely lean towards Fantasy and Always Be My Baby. They are so upbeat and fun. I also really enjoyed When I Saw You and her cover of Open Arms. All of these songs were just vocally incredible. So thank you so much to all of you who recommended that I listen to this album. I really enjoyed it. As always, let me know in the comments down below what music I should react to and what other topics you'd like to see me cover on my channel. Check the description for that donation link. Please subscribe to be here when I post new videos every week. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you are staying safe and healthy, and until next time, that's it.